There is a moment, and every man who has lived long enough knows exactly the one I mean, where you look at someone you have called your brother for decades and you realize you are looking at a stranger. Not because they changed overnight, but because the person standing in front of you has been making choices, quiet and deliberate choices, that you were never supposed to find out about. And today we are going to pull that moment apart completely. We are going to talk about male friendship. Not the romanticized version, not the highlight reel of locker room loyalty and standing best man at each other's weddings. We are talking about the architecture underneath all of that. The invisible scaffolding that holds two men together through years of shared history, and more importantly, what happens when one of them decides to light a match at the base of it. Because here is the thing that nobody wants to say out loud. The most devastating betrayals in a man's life rarely come from enemies. They come from the person who knew the alarm code to your house, the person you called when your father died, the person who sat across from you at 1,000 dinners and looked you in the eye and smiled while carrying something they had no intention of ever telling you. Let us start at the foundation. What actually builds a male friendship at the deepest level? Not proximity, not habit, not the fact that you went to the same school or worked in the same office. Those things create familiarity, but they do not create loyalty. What creates loyalty between men is shared risk. It is the times you embarrassed yourselves together. The times one of you was falling apart and the other one showed up without being asked. The times you made promises, not the ceremonial kind, but the quiet kind that exist only between the two of you. The kind that never needed to be written down, because it felt unthinkable that they would ever be broken. That is the architecture, and it is far more fragile than it looks from the outside. Now here is where it gets psychologically interesting. When one man begins to carry a secret that directly violates the unspoken code of the friendship, something strange and specific happens inside him. He does not immediately become a monster. He does not suddenly stop caring. What he does, and this is documented in how humans manage cognitive dissonance, is begin to construct a parallel internal narrative, a story he tells himself that makes the betrayal feel justified, feel necessary, feel inevitable. He starts collecting grievances he never mentioned before. He starts reinterpreting old memories. He starts finding reasons why his friend was never really there for him anyway, why the friendship was always a little unbalanced, why he deserves this. This is not weakness, it is actually a sophisticated psychological defense mechanism, but it is also the exact process by which a lifelong bond gets quietly dismantled from the inside out, brick by brick, long before anyone even knows demolition has begun. And the other man, the one being deceived, is often the last to understand what he is actually seeing. Because here is the cruel irony of trust. When you truly trust someone, you extend to them the most dangerous gift you can give another person. You give them the benefit of the doubt as a reflex. You interpret their distance as stress. You interpret their coldness as a hard week. You interpret every warning sign through the most generous possible lens because you have years of evidence that this person is worth trusting. That evidence becomes a blindfold. Now let us talk about illicit desire specifically, because this is where the structural collapse becomes almost mathematically predictable. When a man develops attraction to someone who belongs, in whatever relational sense, within the protected orbit of his closest friend, he crosses a line that has almost no return path. Not because of the desire itself. Desire is not a moral failure, but because of what he does next. The calculated nature of what follows is what truly defines the betrayal. Every interaction now becomes a performance. Every conversation with his friend becomes a script he has to manage. He is now living in two simultaneous realities, and maintaining that double existence requires an ongoing series of small, compounding deceptions that collectively add up to something enormous, something that fundamentally alters who he is in the relationship. He is no longer a friend who happens to be carrying a difficult secret. He is now an active participant in undermining the foundation of someone who trusts him completely. And the man on the other side, once he finally sees it, once the curtain drops and the architecture he thought was solid reveals itself to have been hollow for God knows how long, he does not just lose a friend. He loses something much harder to replace. He loses his read on reality. He starts questioning every memory. Every conversation takes on a new and awful possible meaning. Was that moment real? Was that one? How long was I standing in a room that had already been evacuated? This is what people underestimate about profound betrayal between close male friends. It is not the loss of the relationship itself that does the most damage, though that damage is real and significant. It is the epistemological crisis that follows. The sudden inability to trust your own perception of things you experienced firsthand. The man you are becoming now has to be rebuilt on entirely different terms. There is a concept worth naming here. Some researchers who study relationship dissolution talk about something they call a narrative collapse. It is the moment when the story you have been telling yourself about your life, specifically about a relationship at the center of it, becomes impossible to sustain. And what makes it particularly brutal in the context of male friendship is that men are already working against a cultural deficit when it comes to processing emotional devastation. Men are not typically trained to sit in grief. They are trained to solve, to act, to move forward. But the grief that comes from a friendship betrayal of this magnitude is not a problem that can be solved. It has to be felt completely before it can be integrated. And if it is not integrated, it calcifies. It becomes the foundation for how the man approaches every significant relationship going forward, not with openness, but with a low-grade vigilance that never fully turns off. Now let us talk about the bridge metaphor, because I think it is worth complicating. We have all heard the idea that some bridges burn, but what this particular dynamic reveals is something more disturbing than a bridge simply catching fire. It reveals that the bridge was already compromised. That while you were walking across it with complete confidence, someone who built it alongside you had been quietly removing structural components from underneath. The fire, when it finally comes, is almost a mercy. At least now you can see clearly what you are standing on. The actual tragedy is not the burning. It is the realization of how long you were crossing something that should not have been able to hold your weight. So where does this leave us? What does a man actually do with this kind of reckoning? First, he has to resist the urge to universalize it. The response that says, "I will never trust anyone that deeply again," is psychologically understandable, but it is also a way of handing the person who betrayed you an ongoing victory. You are letting them reshape your future relationships from a distance, which is a second betrayal you are inflicting on yourself. Second, he has to be honest about his own role in building the mythology of the friendship. Not in a self-blaming way, but in a clear-eyed way. Sometimes we invest people with a level of integrity that we need them to have rather than integrity we have actually verified. That is not naivety, it is human. But confronting it honestly is part of rebuilding a perception of reality that can actually be trusted. Third, and this is the one that requires the most psychological courage, he has to find a way to hold two truths simultaneously: that the friendship was real and that the betrayal was real. Both can be true at the same time. People are complex and sometimes contradictory enough to be genuinely loyal for 20 years and genuinely treacherous in the end. Accepting that complexity does not excuse anything, but it does prevent the kind of binary thinking that makes it impossible to ever genuinely invest in another person again. The moment a shared history collapses is not the beginning of the story. It is the end of a chapter that was already being written without you. The question is not how you survive it, because you will. The question is what kind of man you decide to become on the other side of it, and whether you let the architecture of what was broken determine the blueprint of what you build next.